When the doctor repeated my son's exact words to me that he was at his mother-in-law's birthday party, and if I died, they should just notify him afterward, I felt like the hospital ceiling was collapsing right on top of me. The blood froze in my veins, and my hands stopped shaking instantly, replacing the fear of death with a cold, brutal clarity. Robert thought I was just a helpless old woman on the verge of dying, but he forgot a small legal detail that was about to cost him his entire inheritance. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my dignity, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any real-life stories like this one. What you're about to hear is a painful but necessary life lesson that every mother needs to know. I promise you, the ending will leave you satisfied. Stay until the very last second, because this story might just open your eyes. I'm Eleanor. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent my entire life working at my barbecue joint in a working-class neighborhood in Kansas City. I thought my sacrifice as a mother meant everything, and that I had raised a good man. But life taught me the hard way that money can change even your own blood. I pulled down the metal security gate of my restaurant with that screeching sound I know by heart, a sound that marks the end of another day of battle here on the block. At 72, my bones sometimes crack louder than the rusty hinges of the shop, but I don't complain. I adjusted my heavy cardigan over my shoulders, that same blue cardigan that smells of hickory smoke, paprika, brown sugar, and slow-roasted brisket. It's funny how the smell of work gets into your pores, like a second baptism. That aroma is my pride. It's what paid for my son's law degree. It's what built the walls of my house and what has kept me standing since I became a widow. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, feeling the cool Missouri air on my face. I was thinking about the catering orders for the weekend, calculating how many pounds of ribs I was going to need. Then I felt that buzzing in my ears. Again. It was like a furious hornet's nest inside my head. Dr. Evans had already scolded me last week. He told me that my high blood pressure was a ticking time bomb, that I needed to rest, that I should leave the business. But I'm stubborn, I'm from the Midwest, and we don't quit over a little dizziness. I told myself it was just fatigue, that once I got home, I'd take an aspirin, drink some herbal tea, and be right as rain. I tried to cross the street, but the asphalt turned into water beneath my feet. The car lights stretched out like neon rubber bands, and the noise of the traffic faded away, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. I remember reaching out, looking for a utility pole, a wall, anything to grab onto. But I found only air. The last thing I thought about before everything went black was the industrial smoker, hoping I had latched the door tight. I woke up, and the first thing I felt was the cold. It wasn't the evening chill. It was that clinical, metallic, alien cold of hospitals. I opened my eyes, and the white light hurt deep inside my brain. I was on a gurney with an IV connected to my arm. That arm, which has carried sacks of charcoal and heavy cast-iron pots, now looked so fragile, full of bruises and bulging veins under the fluorescent light. My hip hurt a sharp, stabbing pain that stole my breath. A young nurse walked over when she saw me moving. She looked like a teenager and watched me with that mix of pity and hurry they have for old folks who arrive at the ER alone. She explained that I had passed out on the sidewalk, that some good Samaritans had called 911, and that my blood pressure was through the roof. She said I needed surgery, something about my hip or femur. I didn't understand her well because the fear was buzzing louder than my blood pressure. Then came the question I feared more than the scalpel. She asked about my family. She told me they had checked my purse, found my ID, but my cell phone was locked, and they didn't know who to notify. I felt a hollow pit in my stomach, bigger than the hunger of my poverty-stricken days. I nodded slowly, my mouth dry. I asked for my phone with a thread of a voice. My fingers trembled so much that I struggled to punch in the passcode. That date of birth, it's his, not mine. I searched for the contact. Robert, my son, my only child, the apple of my eye, the successful corporate attorney who almost never comes to the old neighborhood anymore because he says it gets his Italian loafers dirty. I looked at the lit-up screen and felt a nostalgia that tightened my chest. I remembered when he was a boy, clinging to my apron strings, afraid of the dark, promising me that when he grew up, he'd buy me a palace. Now he's grown, and he has the palace, but I feel like I'm in an empty house, even if it's full of furniture. I dialed his number. The ringtone sounded once, twice, 3 times. Each ring was a blow to the chest. I imagined he was busy, maybe in an important board meeting, maybe dining at one of those five-star steakhouses he goes to with his wife. That woman who looks at me as if I were an old piece of furniture that doesn't match her minimalist decor. The nurse waited by my side, and I felt the need to justify him before he answered, to tell her that he is an important man, that he does love me, that I am not alone, but I stayed silent. I just closed my eyes and prayed softly to the good Lord, not to heal my hip, but for my son to answer the phone and not make me feel like a nuisance in his schedule. The phone kept ringing, and in that prolonged silence, the loneliness felt colder than the emergency room. While the ringtone droned on in my ear, endless and monotonous, my mind flew far away from that ER. It traveled back 30 years. Suddenly, it didn't smell like disinfectant or medicine anymore. It smelled like burning oak and raw dough. I saw myself getting up at 4 a.m., when the streets of Kansas City were still dark and the cold cut to the bone. For 3 decades, that was my life. Before the sun came up, I was already wrestling with huge briskets, mixing spices, chopping onions, until my tears dried up out of habit. I looked at my hands on the white hospital sheet. They are misshapen, full of spots and scars, with knuckles swollen from arthritis. But back then, they were strong, even if they were always red from the heat of the pit. I thought a lot about that while I battled the fire my hands burned so that his would only ever touch books. I didn't want Robert to have calluses, nor did I want him to know the weight of a sack of charcoal. I wanted his hands to be soft, like a lawyer's hands that signed important papers and shook hands with decent people. I remembered the day he arrived with the acceptance letter from that private university, the most expensive one in the state. He was happy, but I felt the ground open up beneath me because I didn't even have the money for the enrollment fee. Without saying a word to him, I took the only thing of value I had left from his father. My wedding rings were gold, good gold, heavy, the kind they don't make anymore. I went to the jewelry district and sold them without bargaining, feeling like a piece of history was leaving with them. When I handed him the money, I told him it was savings from the business. He never knew I sold my past to buy his future. And it worked. He graduated with honors, became an important man. But the success I bought him was the very thing that took him away from me. At first, he came to visit, but then he met Vanessa. I remember the first time he brought her to the house. She wrinkled her nose as soon as she crossed the threshold and wiped the chair with a tissue before sitting down. She said my house smelled like grease, that the aroma of barbecue clung to her designer clothes and salon hair. Little by little, the Sunday visits stopped. Robert stopped coming, out of shame or to avoid fighting with her. And I was left alone with my smokers and my pride. Now, the only times I see his name on my phone is when he needs something. He doesn't call to ask if I've eaten or if I took my medication. He calls because he wants to trade in his luxury car, because they want to go to Europe, or because he's stuck with a payment on his mortgage in the gated community. And I, the foolish mother, always say yes in the end. I break the piggy bank. I go to the bank. I co-sign whatever he needs. I thought that if I gave him money, I was buying a little bit of his affection, or at least a moment of his attention. The phone continued ringing without an answer, and I felt a hot tear sliding down toward the pillow. That promise he made me when he was 5 years old echoed in my head, back when he was sick with a fever and I didn't leave his side for 3 nights. He grabbed my face with his little sweaty hands and swore that when he was big, he was going to take care of me, that he would never leave me alone. That lie hurt more than the broken bone in my hip. The operator's voice told me the call was going to voicemail, and for the first time in my life, I felt that all that sacrifice, all that unconditional love, had gone down the drain, leaving me empty and broken on a hospital gurney. Just as my cell phone screen went dark, I saw Dr. Evans walk in. I recognized him immediately despite the white coat, because he's been a customer at the smokehouse for over 15 years. One of those who always orders the burnt ends special and leaves a big tip. But this time, he wasn't wearing that good-natured smile he greets me with on Sundays. He had his eyes cast down, heavy with a sorrow that wasn't his, but someone else's. He approached my gurney slowly, dragging his feet as if he had lead in his shoes, and placed his hand over mine. He told me he had to be honest with me, that he couldn't let me go into surgery with lies in my head. Turns out, the nurse hadn't failed to communicate. Robert had answered the phone before I tried to call. I felt a lurch in my stomach, preparing myself to hear that he was on his way, that he was stuck in traffic, or even that he was in an important meeting. But the truth was much crueler, sharper than any scalpel. The doctor, his voice cracking with embarrassment, repeated my son's exact words. He told me that Robert was in Aspen, Colorado, celebrating his mother-in-law's birthday, and that he had said, verbatim, that if I died, they should notify him afterward because he couldn't ruin the party right then. In that instant, time stopped. You'd think the pain would make me burst into tears, that I'd start screaming, or that my blood pressure would rise until my veins burst. But none of that happened. On the contrary, it was as if all the noise in the world suddenly turned off. I stopped shaking. The fear I had of the surgery, of death, of loneliness, it all evaporated. In its place entered a dry cold, a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was the same steel resolve I had when I negotiated with meat suppliers, when I defended my corner in the neighborhood. My hands, those misshapen, hard-working hands, stayed still on the sheet. Dr. Evans observed me with curiosity, noticing the change in my demeanor. He smiled with a sad complicity and dropped a truth that no one else knew. He told me he was sure Robert thought I was just a helpless old lady, a burden that was no longer useful. He asked me, lowering his voice, if my son actually knew whose name was on the property deeds, if he had any idea who the real owner of the ground he walked on was. That was when reality hit me, but not to hurt me, to arm me. Robert struts around his firm in the financial district of downtown Kansas City, showing off his success and his luxury office. But he forgot a fundamental detail. He forgot that that building, that office with the view of the skyline where he receives his millionaire clients, I bought it dollar by dollar with the sales of my barbecue. The deed is in my name. I gave him the lease for free so he could shine, so he could be someone, but the landlord is me. I looked the doctor in the eyes with a firmness that surprised him, and I told him I didn't need a priest or to say goodbye to anyone. I asked him, with the urgency of someone running out of time, to get me a notary public immediately. I had to sign some documents before the anesthesia put me under, because whether I died or lived, I was going to do it with my dignity intact and the accounts settled. 3 days passed before the door to my room opened to let in the person I expected most, and at the same time, the person I wanted to see least. Robert walked in with a rehearsed smile and a bouquet of carnations, the kind they sell at gas stations. Those flowers you buy out of pity or haste, not out of love. The smell of his expensive cologne, the one I gave him last Christmas, flooded the room, fighting with the scent of disinfectant. He approached with open arms, saying what a scare I had given him, that he had prayed so much for me. He tried to hug me, but I, with the little strength I had left after they sawed through my bone, raised my hand and stopped him cold. My gesture was a concrete wall between us. He froze with his arms in the air, like an elegant scarecrow. He sat on the edge of the bed, visibly uncomfortable because I wasn't playing along with his theater. He started rattling off a string of excuses that he must have had well memorized. He told me the signal in the mountains was terrible, that his phone had malfunctioned, that he was closing a vital deal for the family, and that as soon as he found out, he flew back to be with me. I let him talk, watching his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed saliva. He was the same boy who used to lie to me about his homework, only now he was wearing a designer suit and a gold watch. When he finally paused to take a breath, I stared straight into his eyes with that look only a mother has when she knows she's being played. I told him to save the stories. I told him he'd be better off telling me how the cake was in Aspen. His face transformed. He went pale, as if his blood pressure had dropped all at once. He stammered, trying to deny the undeniable, but I gave him no truce. I told him I hoped with all my heart that his mother-in-law's party had been worth it, because that weekend had cost him more than he imagined. I told him that slice of cake had cost him his inheritance. Robert let out a nervous little laugh, the kind that sounds like breaking glass. He looked at me condescendingly, as if the anesthesia had affected my judgment. He told me not to talk nonsense, that surely I was delirious from the meds, that I should rest. He tried to pat my hand, treating me like a senile old woman who doesn't know what she's saying. That was when I pointed to the manila envelope resting on the nightstand next to my water cup. I ordered him to open it. He did so with disdain, but as his eyes scanned the stamped paper, his arrogance crumbled. He saw the notary's seal. He saw the date and time, minutes before my surgery. He read the clause where I, Eleanor, legitimate owner of the commercial building in the financial district, revoked the rent-free lease I had granted my son. He read that the previous will was annulled and that my assets were moving into a trust for charity in the event of my death. Robert looked up, and there was no mockery left, only pure panic. He shouted at me that this couldn't be, that that was his office, that he met his clients there, that how could I do this to my own flesh and blood? I settled back into the pillow, feeling the pain in my hip but an immense peace in my soul. I told him with a firm voice, without batting an eyelash, that for years I was his mother, but he had confused me with his bank. I reminded him that when the doctor called him, he decided I was already dead, that I was just paperwork that could wait until Monday. I told him that if to him I was already dead that day, then my wallet should be dead too. Seeing him there, stammering excuses and sweating cold fear over losing his status, hurt me more than the operation, but it also set me free. I told him to take his cheap flowers because I was still alive, and unfortunately for him, my memory was too. The day I was discharged, the Kansas City sun was beating down on the sidewalk, but I felt a strange chill as I crossed the automatic doors of the hospital. It wasn't Robert's strong arm that held me up so I wouldn't trip with my new walker, but the firm and loving arm of my best friend, Martha. She was the one who helped me into the cab, who carried my bag with the dirty clothes, and who adjusted my cardigan so the air wouldn't hit me. Neither my son nor his taillights were anywhere to be seen. So be it. That's how things are when you decide to stop being a doormat and become a wall. When I got home, the silence welcomed me like an old friend. Before, it used to scare me. I felt like the house was crashing down on me. But now, sitting in my kitchen, I felt a peace I hadn't known. Martha served me a warm peach cobbler she'd bought at the market, with that sugary crust I like so much. And while I sank the spoon into the dessert, she told me the gossip the lawyer had spared me. She told me the eviction from the office was a scandal, that Robert screamed and threatened everyone when they changed the locks, claiming they were robbing him. God knows I didn't rob anyone. I simply took back what I sweated for, drop by drop, smoking meat for 40 years. According to the laws here in Missouri, what's mine is mine until I die. And since he pronounced me dead ahead of time, well, he was left with nothing ahead of time. That afternoon, when I was alone, I shuffled slowly to the living room. There it was, still on the mantel, that photo of Robert in his cap and gown, smiling with that degree I paid for by selling my rings. I stared at it for a long time. My chest hurt. Of course it hurt, because you don't stop being a mother just because the child turns out ungrateful. But the lack of respect hurt more. That way of seeing me as a nuisance, as old furniture that no longer matches his rich life. I opened the drawer of the sideboard, the one where I keep the candles and receipts, and I shoved the photo face down to the very back. It was like closing a book that will never be read again. I realized that money can buy many things. With the money from renting out the office, I'll be able to pay for a home health aide to look after me. I'll be able to buy my medicine without wringing my hands. I can even pay for a housekeeper. Money buys care. Yes, but it doesn't buy love. And Robert's love, if it ever truly existed, dried up when the source of income ran out. At least, I told myself as I savored the last sweet bite of the cobbler, I kept my dignity. I am not going to be the little old lady crashing in the daughter-in-law's house, nor the mother begging for a phone call. As night fell, I lit a candle on my small altar table. There was my statue of the Virgin Mary, watching me with her merciful eyes. I crossed myself slowly, feeling the creak of my old bones. I didn't ask for Robert to come back, or for him to repent, because miracles exist, but one shouldn't push their luck. I asked for me. I asked for the strength to walk alone with my walker, not to let my heart grow bitter, and to enjoy the years I have left with my head held high. My son chose his path, and I chose mine. And although it hurts, tonight I will sleep peacefully, knowing that in my house and in my life, the only owner is still me. 6 months have passed since the surgery. My hip healed well, and I'm walking without the walker around my barbecue joint, though now I only supervise to make sure the seasoning stays just right. The office I took back from Robert rented out quickly. That money pays my nurse promptly and covers my little pleasures. I haven't heard a thing from my son, and although sometimes I miss the boy I raised, I don't miss the lawyer who left me for dead. Today my house smells of peace, not loneliness. Dignity isn't something you beg for from your children. You defend it with your head held high. My advice is firm. Protect your assets legally, and never give your inheritance while you are alive to someone who doesn't value you. The papers in your name are your best insurance for old age. Tell me, would you have had the courage to cut your only son out of the will? I'll read you in the comments. Eleanor, 72.